What happens when a prince thinks he can walk into a television studio and demand special treatment from one of Britain's most respected journalists? It only took 14 seconds of pure arrogance for Prince Harry to completely destroy his own reputation and show the world exactly what kind of entitled person he really island. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday evening as Piers Morgan adjusted his tie and checked his notes one final time. 20 years in television had taught him to expect anything. But even he couldn't have predicted the absolute meltdown that was about to unfold right there on live television. The cameras were rolling, millions of viewers were tuned in, and sitting across from him was a man who clearly believed the rules simply didn't apply to him. Good evening and welcome to the show. Piers began with his trademark confident smile. Tonight we have a very special guest, Prince Harry, who has agreed to join us for what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation about his recent projects and his thoughts on current events. Harry shifted uncomfortably in his chair, already looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. His posture was stiff, his jaw clenched tight, and there was something in his eyes that suggested this interview was going to be anything but smooth sailing. "Thank you for having me, Piers," Harry replied, though his tone was cold enough to freeze water. "Though I have to say, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by current events." Piers raised an eyebrow. This was already getting interesting, and they were barely 30 seconds into the interview. "Well, Harry, I think our viewers are quite curious about your recent statements regarding the media and how you feel you've been treated by the press over the years." "The media?" Harry repeated slowly, like the words left a bad taste in his mouth. "You mean the same media that has made my life absolutely miserable since the day I was born? The same media that hounded my mother until her dying day? That media?" The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Piers had conducted thousands of interviews, faced down politicians, celebrities, and world leaders. But there was something particularly volatile about the man sitting across from him tonight. "I understand you've had difficult experiences," Piers said carefully, maintaining his professional composure. "But surely you can see that media coverage isn't always negative. There have been many positive stories about your charitable work, your military service, your family life." Harry let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the studio. "Positive stories? Are you seriously sitting there and telling me that the coverage has been balanced? Do you actually read the newspapers you work for?" "I work in television, Harry, not newspapers," Piers corrected gently, "and I think our viewers would appreciate a more measured discussion about these issues rather than accusations." "Accusations?" Harry's voice rose sharply. "These aren't accusations, Piers. These are facts. The British media has been absolutely ruthless, and frankly, I'm sick of pretending otherwise just to make people comfortable." Piers leaned forward slightly, recognizing the signs of someone who was about to completely lose control. In his experience, when guests started raising their voices this early in an interview, things were about to get very messy very quickly. "I think what our audience is really interested in," Piers said, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, "is understanding how you balance your public duties with your desire for privacy. It's a challenge that many public figures face." "Public duties?" Harry practically spat the words. "What public duties? I'm not even a working royal anymore, remember? I gave that up so I could actually have a life, so I could protect my family from people like you." The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the cameras. Piers felt his jaw tighten. In 20 years of journalism, he had always maintained his professionalism, even with the most difficult guests. But something about Harry's attitude, his complete lack of respect, was starting to get under his skin. "People like me?" Piers asked, his voice still controlled but with a slight edge that regular viewers would recognize. "I'm a journalist, Harry. I ask questions. That's what journalists do. We don't manufacture stories out of thin air." "Don't you?" Harry shot back immediately. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you spend most of your time making mountains out of molehills, twisting innocent comments into scandals, and generally making people's lives miserable for the sake of ratings." Piers set down his pen and looked directly at Harry. This was the moment when experienced interviewers had to make a choice. Let the guests continue their tantrum or take back control of the conversation. And Piers Morgan had not built his reputation by backing down from entitled celebrities who thought they could walk all over him. "I think you're confusing journalism with entertainment, Harry," Piers said firmly. "Real journalism is about asking tough questions, holding people accountable, and giving the public the information they deserve. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps the problem isn't with the media." Harry's face flushed red. "Are you seriously lecturing me about accountability? You people have no accountability whatsoever. You print whatever you want, destroy whoever you want, and then hide behind press freedom when anyone calls you out on it. And you hide behind your royal title when anyone challenges you," Piers replied without missing a beat, The difference is, I actually have to answer to my audience, my editors, and broadcasting standards. Who do you answer to, Harry? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harry's hands were clenched into fists on the armrests of his chair, and his breathing had become noticeably heavier. This was a man who was clearly not used to being questioned, not used to having his opinions challenged, and definitely not used to being held accountable for his words and actions. I answer to my family, Harry said through gritted teeth. I answer to my wife, my children, and my conscience. Not to you, not to your viewers, and certainly not to the British public who seem to think they own me. Piers couldn't help but shake his head. That's exactly the attitude that gets you into trouble, Harry. You can't expect to make public statements, give interviews, write books, and then claim you don't owe anyone an explanation when those statements are questioned. I don't owe anyone anything, Harry declared loudly. I've served my country, I've done my duty, and I've paid my dues. If people don't like the fact that I want to live my life on my own terms, that's their problem, not mine. The studio audience, which had been silent up until this point, began to murmur quietly. Even they could sense that something was seriously wrong with this interview. Piers glanced at his producer through the camera, and the slight nod he received told him everything he needed to know. Keep going. This was television gold. But you're not living your life on your own terms, are you, Harry? Piers pressed. You're constantly giving interviews, making documentaries, writing books, appearing on talk shows. You can't have it both ways. You can't court publicity when it suits you, and then complain about media attention when it doesn't. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. I knew this was a mistake. I knew you would try to twist everything I said and make me look like the bad guy. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly why I can't stand dealing with people like you. Piers remained seated, calm, and professional despite the chaos unfolding in front of him. Harry, I think you should sit back down. We're in the middle of a live television interview. Millions of people are watching. Let them watch, Harry snarled. Let them see what their precious media really does to people. Let them see how you operate. Piers looked up at Harry with the kind of steady gaze that had made him one of the most feared interviewers in television. Here was a grown man, a prince no less, throwing what could only be described as a tantrum on live television because he didn't like being asked basic questions about his own public statements. Harry, Piers said, his voice perfectly calm, I'm going to ask you one more time to sit down and conduct this interview like an adult. You agreed to come on this show. You knew what kind of program this island. You knew I was going to ask you challenging questions. Challenging questions? Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call this character assassination? Is that what you call trying to make me look like some kind of spoiled brat who doesn't appreciate everything he's been given? The irony was lost on absolutely no one in the studio. Here was Harry, literally acting like a spoiled brat who didn't appreciate everything he'd been given, while complaining about being portrayed as exactly that. I'm not trying to make you look like anything, Harry, Piers replied. I'm simply asking you to explain your positions and defend your statements. That's what happens in interviews. That's what happens when you choose to be a public figure. I didn't choose anything, Harry shot back, still standing, his hands gesturing wildly. I was born into this. I never had a choice. And now that I'm finally trying to make my own choices, you people won't leave me alone. Piers set his notes aside completely. This was no longer about the prepared questions or the planned talking points. This was about a man having a complete breakdown on live television. And as a journalist, Piers knew his job was to document it honestly. But you are making choices, Harry, Piers said. You chose to leave your royal duties. You chose to move to America. You chose to write a book. You chose to do interviews. You chose to come on this show tonight. These are all choices you made as an adult. Stop saying that, Harry snapped. Stop acting like everything is so simple, like every decision exists in a vacuum. You have no idea what it's like to live under this kind of scrutiny, to have every single thing you do analyzed and criticized. You're right, Piers acknowledged. I don't know what it's like to be born into royalty, but I do know what it's like to be in the public eye, and I know that if you can't handle the scrutiny, you shouldn't seek the spotlight. I'm not seeking the spotlight, Harry protested, his voice getting louder with each word. I'm trying to tell my side of the story. I'm trying to set the record straight about what really happened. By doing interviews, writing books, and appearing on television shows? Piers asked with raised eyebrows. Harry, do you hear yourself right now? You're literally on a television show complaining about being on television shows. The studio audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Some looked uncomfortable, Others seemed fascinated, but everyone was watching as one of the most famous men in the world completely lost control of his emotions on live television. "You're twisting my words," Harry accused, pointing a finger directly at Piers. "You're doing exactly what I said you would do. You're taking what I'm saying and turning it into something else entirely." "I'm repeating your exact words back to you," Piers replied calmly. "If you don't like how they sound, perhaps you should think more carefully before you say them." Harry's face was now completely red, and there was a vein visible in his forehead that suggested he was about as angry as a person could possibly be. "You know what? I'm done with this. I'm absolutely done with this nonsense." "You're done?" Piers asked. "We're 20 minutes into a scheduled hour-long interview, Harry. Are you seriously telling me that you're going to walk out because you don't like being asked basic questions about your own behavior?" "These aren't basic questions," Harry exploded. "These are attacks. This is exactly the kind of hostile treatment that made me leave the country in the first place. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say the British media is toxic and destructive." Piers stood up slowly, matching Harry's height and looking him directly in the eye. "The only thing that's toxic and destructive in this studio right now is your attitude, Harry. I've been nothing but professional with you. I've asked you fair questions about your public statements and given you every opportunity to explain your positions." "Fair questions?" Harry's voice cracked with incredulity. "You call questioning my motives fair? You call suggesting that I'm seeking attention fair? You call implying that I'm some kind of hypocrite fair?" "I call holding you accountable for your contradictions fair," Piers replied without backing down. "You can't complain about media attention while constantly courting media attention. You can't demand privacy while writing tell-all books. You can't claim to want a normal life while making millions of dollars from being abnormal." "How dare you?" Harry whispered, his voice now dangerously low. "How dare you stand there and lecture me about my life choices? You have no idea what I've been through. You have no idea what my family has been through. And you have no idea what millions of ordinary people go through every single day without the benefit of wealth, privilege, and global platforms to complain about their problems." Piers shot back. "The difference is, they don't expect the world to feel sorry for them." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. His mouth fell open, his eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed completely speechless. The studio was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was clearly a defining moment in the interview. "I never asked for pity," Harry finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't you?" Piers asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what this whole conversation has been about." Poor Harry, born into one of the most privileged families on earth, upset that people expect him to behave with dignity and grace in exchange for that privilege. "You don't understand," Harry said, shaking his head. "You don't understand what it's like to lose your mother, to have that happen in front of the whole world, to have people profit from your grief." "You're absolutely right," Piers said, his tone softening slightly. "I don't understand that specific pain, and I'm sorry for your loss. But Harry, that tragedy doesn't give you a free pass to treat everyone around you badly. It doesn't excuse this behavior." "This behavior?" Harry's anger flared up again instantly. "What behavior? Defending myself? Standing up for my family? Refusing to be bullied by people like you?" "No one is bullying you, Harry," Piers said firmly. "This is a conversation between two adults about your public statements and actions. If you can't handle that level of discussion without having an emotional breakdown, then perhaps you shouldn't be making public statements in the first place." Harry stared at Piers for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Everyone in the studio could see that he was struggling to maintain any semblance of composure, that he was right on the edge of either completely losing it or storming off the set entirely. "You know what the real problem is?" Harry said finally. "The real problem is that you people think you own me. You think because I was born into this family, because I grew up in the public eye, that gives you the right to judge everything I do and say." "Nobody owns you, Harry," Piers replied. "But if you want to be a public figure, if you want to write books and give interviews and make money from your royal connections, then yes, people are going to judge what you do and say. That's how it works for everyone." "It's different for me, and you know it," Harry insisted. "The level of scrutiny, the constant invasion of privacy, the way every single word gets twisted and analyzed, it's not normal." "You're right, it's not normal," Piers agreed. "It's actually much better than what most people get. Most people don't have teams of publicists and media managers. Most people don't have the resources to fight back against unfair coverage. Most people just have to accept whatever gets written about them and move on with their lives." That last comment was clearly the final straw for Harry. His face went from red to purple, His hands clenched into tight fists, and his entire body began to shake with barely controlled rage. The studio lights seemed to make his fury even more visible, casting harsh shadows across his face as he struggled to find words that could express just how angry he was. "Move on with their lives?" Harry repeated, his voice rising to a level that made the sound technicians wince. "Move on? Are you completely insane? Do you have any idea what it's like to have photographers chase you down the street? Do you know what it's like to have people write lies about your wife? About your children?" Piers remained perfectly calm, which only seemed to make Harry angrier. "Harry, I'm not denying that you face challenges, but you're acting like you're the only person who has ever dealt with negative press coverage. Politicians, actors, athletes, business leaders, they all face the same thing." "No, they don't," Harry screamed, completely losing any pretense of composure. "They chose their careers. They chose to put themselves in the spotlight. I was born into this nightmare, and people like you have been making my life hell ever since." The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable. Some people were shifting in their seats, others were looking around nervously, and a few seemed to be wondering if they should leave. This was no longer an interview. It was a public breakdown, and everyone could see it happening in real time. "Harry," Piers said, his voice still professional despite the chaos, "I think you need to take a deep breath and calm down. You're on live television right now, and millions of people are watching you have what can only be described as a meltdown." "I don't care who's watching," Harry bellowed, his voice echoing off the studio walls. "Let them watch. Let them see what you people do to anyone who dares to stand up to you. Let them see how you try to destroy anyone who tells the truth about how corrupt and vicious this industry really island." Piers shook his head slowly. In all his years of journalism, he had never seen anything quite like this. He had interviewed terrorists, dictators, and convicted criminals who had shown more self-control than the man standing in front of him right now. "The only person destroying anything right now is you, Harry," Piers said quietly. "You're destroying your own reputation, your own credibility, and any sympathy people might have had for your situation." "My reputation?" Harry laughed maniacally. "What reputation? You people destroyed that years ago with your lies and your gossip and your complete lack of basic human decency." "We didn't write your book, Harry," Piers pointed out. "We didn't make you give all those interviews. We didn't force you to make public statements criticizing your own family. You did all of that yourself." "Because I had to," Harry shouted, spit flying from his mouth as he spoke. "Because if I didn't tell my side of the story, you would just keep making things up. You would keep spreading lies and half-truths and completely fabricated nonsense." "So your solution was to spread your own lies and half-truths?" Piers asked. "Because that's what a lot of people think you've been doing, Harry. They think you've been exaggerating, embellishing, and in some cases completely making things up to sell books and get sympathy." Harry's response was immediate and explosive. "How dare you call me a liar? How dare you sit there and suggest that I would make up stories about my own family, about my own life, about the things I've experienced?" "I'm not calling you anything, Harry," Piers replied calmly. "I'm telling you what other people are saying. I'm telling you how your behavior is being perceived by the public. If you don't like that perception, then maybe you should consider changing your behavior." "Change my behavior?" Harry was now pacing back and forth behind his chair like a caged animal. "Change my behavior? I'm not the one who needs to change. You are. The entire media industry needs to change. You need to stop treating people like commodities to be bought and sold for entertainment," says the man who literally sold his family's private conversations for millions of dollars, Piers observed dryly. The comment hit Harry like a lightning bolt. He stopped pacing, turned to face Piers directly, and for a moment looked like he might actually try to physically attack him. His face was contorted with rage. His breathing was heavy and labored, and his entire body was trembling with barely contained violence. "That's it," Harry said through clenched teeth. "That's absolutely it. I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with this entire charade." "So, you're gonna walk out?" Piers asked. "In the middle of a live television interview, you're gonna storm off like a spoiled child who didn't get his way?" "I'm not a spoiled child," Harry roared. "I'm a grown man who refuses to sit here and be insulted and attacked by someone who wouldn't know journalistic integrity if it hit him in the face." "Then prove it," Piers challenged. "Sit back down, control your emotions, and have an adult conversation. Show people that you're capable of handling criticism without having a complete emotional breakdown." Harry stared at Piers for what felt like an eternity. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "You know what?" Harry said finally, his voice now eerily calm. "You're not worth it. This show isn't worth it. These people aren't worth it. I have better things to do with my time than sit here and be abused by a second-rate journalist who peaked 20 years ago. With that, Harry began walking toward the studio exit, but Piers wasn't quite finished with him yet. "Running away again, Harry?" Piers called after him. "Just like you ran away from your royal duties? Just like you ran away from your country? Is that how you handle every difficult situation in your life?" Harry stopped dead in his tracks. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around to face Piers one last time. His eyes were filled with a kind of cold fury that was somehow more frightening than all the screaming and shouting had been. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Harry said in a voice so quiet it was barely audible. "You have no idea who you're dealing with or what I'm capable of." "Is that a threat, Harry?" Piers asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me on live television?" "It's a promise," Harry replied. "You and everyone like you are going to learn that there are consequences for treating people the way you've treated me. There are consequences for this kind of behavior." And with that final dramatic statement, Harry turned and walked out of the studio, leaving behind a shocked audience, a bewildered production crew, and one very satisfied journalist who knew he had just captured one of the most explosive television moments in recent history. Piers turned to the camera, straightened his tie, and smiled that trademark smile that had made him famous. "Well," he said to the millions of viewers watching at home, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about the character of our former royal guest. When faced with basic questions about his own actions and statements, he chose to have a tantrum rather than provide answers. He chose to make threats rather than engage in civil discourse. And ultimately, he chose to run away rather than face the consequences of his own behavior." The camera held on Piers for a moment longer as he shook his head with what appeared to be genuine disappointment. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed what happens when privilege meets accountability and privilege loses. Thank you for watching, and we'll be right back after this break."